We begin today the Gemara towards the bottom of Mem Amud Beis, 3 lines up from the bottom of the Yamud, where it says Omarullah. So in the Mishnah it mentioned one of the things that you ask the Eidim when you interrogate them is, did you give him a warning? So the Gemara here brings the source. Where in the Torah do you see that you have to give a warning in order to then give him the einish of Misa? Omarullah, so Allah said, Minayin lahasra min ha-Torah. What's the source for this that you have to give someone a warning min ha-Torah? So Taisus here actually points out that there's a machlokes about this. It was mentioned earlier in the Masechta, and the Gemara is going to bring it up again soon, that there's one opinion that says that the reason you have to give a warning, you don't really need any source for this. It's a logical thing. If you don't give him a warning, how do you know what he did was b'mezid? How do you know it was deliberate? Maybe it was a mistake. So if that's the pshat, then you don't need any source. But the Gemara is asking it according to the other opinion that says that you always have to give a warning. Even if it's a case that you know a person is a Talmud Chacham and he's definitely amazed without your warning, you still have to give a warning. So therefore the Gemara is asking the question. Another pshat Taisus says is, the Gemara before said that when you give a warning, the person that did the Aveda, it has to be toich kedei dibur of the warning. If there was more than a couple of seconds in between, then the Yasra does not help. It has to be mamash toich kedei dibur. That's a chiddush that the Gemara is bringing here, a pasuk for this. So the Gemara is going to bring no less than 4 sources for Asra. So the first source is Shanema, the pasuk says, by the Isar of Arayis, person that has a relation with his sister, whether from the mother or the father, and he sees her erva. That's the expression the Torah uses. So the Gemara asks, Atu b'ri'iyeh talya milsa? Why is the Torah using this expression of that he sees? We're talking about a relation, a physical relation. So what's this expression? Ella, so what the pasuk is saying is, Achi yir'uhu taimishal davar. It's talking about the Eidim that are warning him. They have to tell him and expose him to what he's doing and the issa that he's doing, and only after he accepts that hasra, then will he be chayav the punishment for this. Now the Gemara goes on to say, in this case, it's talking about arayis. What's the punishment for a person that has a relation with his sister? The punishment is actually b'dei shemayim, which is kodesh. For a einish b'dei shemayim, you don't need any hasra. The Eibishter knows exactly what a person is thinking. So now, eina inyan l'kodesh. So if this expression of ri'iyeh, which means hasra, is not needed for kodesh, which is b'dei shemayim, taneyu inyan l'malchus. So then we apply it to a case of malchus that is also by a sister. There's also a punishment of malchus, and for the malchus, you only give the punishment if you got the proper asra. That's the expression of the pasuk where it says ra sarvasa. Another source, the Bechizkiya Tana, by the Yeshiva of Chizkiya, they taught that by a person that's a Ritzeach, it says, if a person deliberately will go and murder someone. So when it says here Yazid, this word we learn out, Shehisrubai ve'adayin hu mezid. He was warned and he's still amazed. How do we know this? Because it says Yazid. How do we know that it's doing it b'mezid? The pasuk says that we know that he did it b'mezid. It means that we gave him a warning and he still went ahead and did it. And the second pshat Rashi says, because the language of the pasuk, it uses the term yazid, which is, it doesn't say hizid in a lashon avar, that he did it deliberately. We're talking about the past. It uses a lashon asid. A lashon asid means that even after you warned him, he still went ahead and did it after that. That's why it uses the term of yazid, lashon asid. The Beit Rabbi Shmuel Tana, by the Yeshiva of Rabbi Shmuel, they taught and brought a third source for Hasra. It says, when there was this person in the midbar that was Mekoshe Sheitzim, which according to one pshat means he was gathering twigs and wood on Shabbos, and it says, they called him the Mekoshe Sheitzim. From the word Mekoshe, you see, Shehisru Boy, that he got a warning, Va'adayinu Mekoshe, and he still continued doing the malacha of Mekoshe Sheitzim. How do we know this? Because the pasuk does not use the term of kishesh that he already had gathered from before, but it says mekoshesh, a lashon asid, which means even after he was warned, he was still gathering and doing the malacha. A fourth opinion, the Beit Rabbi Tana, by Rabbi they taught that it says by a person that has a relation with a naira ha'ma'irasa. This is a woman that's married. She's an Eishes, but only after the first stage of marriage. So if you have a relation with a naira ma'irasa, in such a case you chayiv skila. So the pasuk says, "Al devar asher ino," because of what happened, the matter that happened, that he afflicted this girl that's a naira ma'irasa. So the expression the pasuk uses, "Al devar," we say, "Al iskei dibur." It's not only what he did, but it's also what he was told. There was words that were said to him. He was warned not to do it, and he'll get the punishment, and he still went ahead and did it. That's from where we see that there has to be a hasra. So we have 4 sources here. Says the Gemara, it's necessary to have all these 4 sources that you need asra. Because the Rachmane, Achoisai, if the Torah would only say that you need asra by arayis, by the source of the sister, Havamina, I would say, Chayvim Malkisin. When it comes to punishment of lashes, there the Torah is lenient that only if you got a warning will you get the punishment. But Chayvim Misaslai, by the others, which we're talking about a much more severe Aveda, where the person's Chayv Misa, maybe there he'll be Chayv Misa even without a punishment. Therefore, Kasav Rachmane Ki Yazid, Torah writes Ki Yazid by the Reitzeach, that's Chayv Misa, that it's only if you got a warning. If the Torah would say Chiyazid over there by Ritzeach, Havamina, I would say Hani Mili Sayif, the kill. I would say maybe there the reason why the Torah is lenient that only if it got a warning is he going to be Chayiv Misa, because the punishment of Misa we're talking about there is the Misa of Sayif with a sword, which is more of a lighter Misa than the others. Avaskila, but stoning a person, the Chamura, that's a much more severe misa, it's a more severe punishment. Maybe here the Torah is more machmer and he's chayiv misa without a punishment. So tzriche, so therefore it's necessary then the Torah to write the other cases, which includes skila as well. So that's the other cases where by Shabbos, the einish is skila, and by the Naira Mirasa. By both of these cases, the misa is skila. So the Gemara goes on to explain now, V'tarti b'niskal and lamali. Why do you need 2 psukim for the hasra in 2 different cases of skila? So the Gemara says it depends which opinion. As this is something that was brought already before in Daf Mem, there's a 4th kind of misa, which is sreifa. Now, which misa is more severe, skila or sreifa? So it's a machlekes between Rab Shimon and the Chachamim. According to Rab Shimon, sreifa is more severe. So therefore, the Rab Shimon lasuyin nisrafin. The 2 cases of skila, you don't need 2 psukim for skila. So one pasuk is coming to teach regarding sreifa that even by the most severe misa, you only give it if the person got a punishment. The Rabbanan, according to the Rabbanan, you don't really need a separate pasuk for sreifa because it's lighter than skila, and therefore I could learn it with a kal v'chayme from skila. But milsa the asi b'kal v'chayme tarach l'kasav lakra. Although it could be learned with a kal v'chayme from skila, but nevertheless the Torah goes out of its way and writes it explicitly by the extra place of skila. Now the Gemara asks, now that we see by the more severe cases of misa, which is skila, it's only if you got a warning. So if so, v'lichtav rachmana ben iskalin. Let the Torah write the halacha of Asra in the case of the Niskalin. And if I learn out the others, I'll learn out by Malchus or by Sayif, I'll learn out from them that it's also only if you got a warning. Says the Gemara Hachanami, so here we have to answer as well the same point. Milsa, the Asib, Kavachayim, Torah because of Lakra. The Torah could have written the halacha of Asra only by Skila, and it writes explicitly by Malchus and by Sayif, because as the klal is, Torah writes even something that you could learn from a Kavachayim.
But maybe a chomer needs a svara, not a kula.
Well, the Gemara here doesn't entertain that svara. The Gemara here says that there's a svara to say that if the more chomer it is, the less of a svara, a need for asra there is, because the person did such a severe aveda, so here the Torah wouldn't be makel by him so much. Hiteratz Melamisa, the Mishnah went on to say, when you get asra, or it was in the Braisa before, the Braisa said that it's not enough to give a person asra. He has to receive the asra. He has to say, yes, I understand what he's saying, that I'm going to be ayin with this and this avera, and it's this and this ayinish. And he has to also mater atzmil misa. He has to say, and I understand that I'm going to be chayiv misa, and only then could you give him the misa. I think it says about this Indian that when you give a person misa, only he himself could give himself the misa. If he himself was mater himself with misa, it's like the Vart of the Baal Shem Tov. He says that when a person comes l'mayla, the lashon of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos is that what's the lashon of the Mishnah again? That a din.
The din on himself.
Yeah, he makes the din on himself. The lashon of the Mishnah just forgot it. But the point is that a yid, when he comes up l'mayla, they ask him about din v'cheshbon. That's you have to give a din v'cheshbon. First, he makes a din about someone else, and then they say, you made that din about someone else. Now let's make a cheshbon how that applies to you, and then he can get the einish. The same thing over here. A yid is matter himself from misa. Only then does he actually get the chi of misa. So what's the source for this? Minallah. So from where do we know this? Omar Avavitei Mechizkiah. Omar Kra, the pasuk said, Yumas hameis, that you give misa to the mace. What does that mean? Achiyata atzma lemisa. It says you're giving misa to someone that's already dead. What do you mean he's already dead? He's not dead yet. Elamai, the answer is he was already matter himself to misa. That's why he's called the mace. Only then could you give him the chi of misa. Amar Rav Chanan. Okay, so based on what we learned here about the concept of asra, the Gemara brings a statement of Rav Chanan that's connected to this. So Rav Chanan said, Eidei naira ha'ma'irasa. witnesses that come to testify that so-and-so had a relation with a Naira Meirasa. Now, that means, seemingly, that they were trying to be mechayev this person's skila. That's the punishment for having a relation with a Naira Meirasa, which is an Eishes Ish, after the first stage of marriage. Shahuzmu, now if these Eidim were found to be Eidim Zaymimin, they're false witnesses, Ein Eragin. We're not going to kill these witnesses. Even though the klal always is that there's an einish of kasha zaman, whatever they wanted to do to the person they said edus about now goes back on them when they're found to be false. But in this case, they won't get a chi of misa. The reason is because these Eidim can come and say lo Yisrael bailabanu. When we testified about her and about this person that had a relation with her, we weren't coming to say that he's chayiv skila. Our intention was just to say that she may not go back to her husband because she already had a relation with someone else. So if that wasn't their intention, they're not going to be chayiv misa. So now the Gemara asks, based on what we just learned here, that you always have to give a warning. But v'ha'asruba, they testified that she had a relation with someone else, and there was a warning. So if they gave a warning, what are they giving a warning for, if not to give a chayiv misa? If the whole point over here is just to aser on her husband, then it wouldn't be a warning here. Says the Gemara, the case must be that there was no warning. Rav Chanan was speaking about a case where there was no warning, so therefore now the Eidim can say, we're just testifying about what we saw, that therefore she's asra to her husband, but there was no asra, and therefore there is no chiv misa here. Fragt the Gemara, but if there is no chiv misa here, heichi miktala, then how would there be any chiv misa here at all? What's the chiddush over here? Rav Chanan came to say that even though seemingly their edus includes two parts. One part is to say that this person's chayiv misa. Another part that it says that she's also to go back to her husband. And now the Eidim can come and say that our intention was just to ask her to her husband. But according to what you're saying now, that it must be that there was no hasra here, because if there was, it's clear that their intention was to be mechayev this person misa. So if there was no hasra, there's no two parts to the edus. There is no chayiv misa here. It's just going to ask her on their husband. So what's the chiddush b'chlal of what Rav Chanan was saying? That the Eidim could say, we didn't intend. There is no chiv misa here b'chlal. Answers the Gemara, Be'isha chaveira. We're talking over here about a woman that's a mulumedes. She knows the halachas. We know that she's a Talmud Chacham. Va'aliba de Rav Yossi Rav Yehuda. And this follows the opinion of Rav Yossi Rav Yehuda about Hasra. As I mentioned in the beginning, that there's another opinion regarding Hasra. The Tanyas, we learned in the Braisa, Rav Yossi Rav Yehuda Oime, Rav Yossi Rav Yehuda says, Chaver ein tzarech Hasra. When you have a Talmud Chacham that we know for a fact that he knows the halacha, he doesn't need any Hasra. Why? Lefi shalei nitna Hasra el lahavchem eshaygig l'mezid. Concept of Hasra is just to verify that he's doing it deliberately and not by mistake. So therefore, in such a case, there is a chiv misa even without giving her a warning, and nevertheless, the Eidim can come and say that wasn't our intention. Our intention was not the misa. Our intention was just to ask her on her husband. Well, the Gemara asks further in this, but if this is the case, the chiv in the inu loy miktali, if these Eidim in such a case can argue this and say that they never intended to kill him, if so, ihi heichi miktala. The question still comes back: how would there be any chiv of misa over here for her having the relation with this person? Why not? Because Hav Yola Eidos Shiatu Yachalazima. This turns out to be now an Eidos, a testimony that there's no way that you can falsify, you can make them Eidim Zaymimin to give them the Chiv Misa. And the rule is V'chol Eidos Shiatu Yachalazima Leishma Eidos. Anytime you say Eidos, one of the halachas about a kosher Eidos is that you have to be able to turn these Eidim into Eidim Zaymimin. If it's a case that they say Eidos and they can't become Eidim Zaymimin, then it's not Eidos at all. As we'll see at the end of the Gemara, this is one of the reasons why you have to have the Sheva Hakiris. Why do you have to have all those interrogations for the Eidim? The time and the place, in order that you should be able to be Mazim them. If you can't be Mazim them, they're not Eidim at all. So over here, if you're telling me that they will never get a punishment of Misa for intending to give her Misa, that means that you could never be Mazim them for Misa. So if so, their Eidus about Misa is not an Eidus in the first place. So we're back to the original question. This is not an Eidus for Misa. So what's the chiddush over here? That they can come and say that our Eidus is only to ask her on the husband and not for Misa. There is no Chiv Misa here in the first place. So the Gemara answers and says, Hachanami Kama, you're right. That's part of exactly what Rav Chanan was trying to say. That mitoich she'ein eragin, since these Eidim Zaymimin, if they turn into Eidim Zaymimin, they will not be killed. She'echaylam loyim lo Yisrael ba'il abana, because they could come and say that the intention of our Eidus was just to ask her on the husband. Afi ein erages. So too she will not get any Chiv Misa at all. The Havila Eidus Yat Yachal Azima, because this is an Eidos that you could never turn them into Eidim Zaymimin and give them the Chiv Misa. So legabe the Chiv misa. There is no edus about this, so it's only going to be a edus to aser her on her husband, but not more.
Just that you don't believe it. You don't believe the edus.
Again?
You don't believe the edus.
Exactly. Legabe the misa though, only legabe the misa, not legabe to aser her on her husband. Okay, so now the Gemara says, so if so, according to this, elo be'isha chaveda. So what's if you have a woman that's a chaveda, she knows everything, and therefore she doesn't need any hasra. The kaim alone the miktala aliba de Rabbi Yosef bar Rabbi Yehuda echem mishkachas law. So we know that even Rabbi Yosef bar Rabbi Yehuda would agree that even by this isha chaveda that's not getting any hasra, but still it is possible to testify and give her a chiyuv misa. But based on what we said, how is that actually possible? Only by a woman that you're giving a hasra, then it's clear that the Eidah wanted to give a chiyuv misa, then it's a Eidah shatu yachal azima, the Eidah themselves would get a chiyuv misa, then it's a kosher Eidah for this point. But by Isha Chaveda, where they're not giving a hasra, and they could claim that our entire intention was just to aser on her husband, so there's no hazama for this point of misa, so it's not even a kosher edus for this. So in such a case, according to Rav Yossi, how would it be possible to give this kind of isha that you don't need asra for her? How would you give these this kind of isha misa? Says the Gemara. So the mishkachas law again. We're over here. Elabisha chavera the kaimla the miktala alib the Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda heicha mishkachas law. How is this possible? So the Gemara answers kishazinsa v'chazra v'zinsa. If she was mizana one time and then a second time, so now when they come and they testify about her the second time, you can't anymore say, oh, they were only saying this to aser on her husband, because she's already asked to her husband. The fact that they're coming and testifying a second time is clearly to come to give her a chiyuv misa. So in such a case, the Edom Zayman would get a chiyuv misa for this. It's Eidah shatu yachal azima, and she would also get a chiyuv misa. But the Gemara still asks on this, but the Edom can still claim and say, la'isra al bayala sheni banu. That we're not saying the testimony to give a chiyuv misa, we're saying it to ask her to ever have a relation with this bayal, with this man that was bayal her, besides the husband that she becomes asa to. So Rashi brings the psukim, you learn out v'nitma, she becomes asa to the bayal as well. So maybe that's what their edus was about, but not to give her a chiyuv misa. Says the Gemara, no, but still the case would be shezinsa mi baal rishain, mi bayal rishain. That is, if she was mazana with the same bayal, so she's already asa to her husband, she's already asa to that bayal. The second time the Edom was saying that this happened is only a edus to come and say that she's chayiv misa, or yinami shezinsa mikrevel, or she was mizana with a relative of hers that she's anyways asa to have a relation with. So the edus was not about trying to asa to that bayal. Okay, now the Gemara just asks about one detail that Rab Chanan said here. Why did Rab Chanan say this halacha that Edom can come and claim and say that our edus was not about giving a chiyuv misa, but our edus was just about asering her to her husband? Why is he talking about a case of a naira ma'irasa, which is only after the first stage of marriage, when they're not even living together? Afilu nesua nami. Why didn't he say the same halacha regarding a married woman, a full eshish, after the second stage of marriage? When you say edus that she was mizana with someone, you can't give the edom misa, you can't give the isha misa, because they can say we are only saying the edus to aser on the husband. Says the Gemara you're right. Ella, the chiddush of Rav Chanan is afila hay de lo yasva to say, even though she's not yet living with her husband, the Edom can still say lo oisra al bayla banu. Our edus was only to aser on her husband. In a case where she's living together with her husband and the husband is having relations with her, obviously they could say we were only saying the edus to separate the husband from her isra, separate the husband from her. In a case when she's not even living with her husband yet, it's still an arusa, she's living herself and the husband's living separately. So over here you may think that the Edom can't claim he wanted to aser on her husband. Anyway, it's not living together. Nevertheless, even in this case, we say this svara that the Edom can say we only wanted to aser on her husband, we didn't necessarily want to give her a chiyuv misa.
Since when they didn't have the power to be the judges too?
They're not the judges. There's no one else that knows their intention. So they're saying if they can, you don't even have to say this. They don't even have to say this. The Gemara says, Chanan is saying that they could say this. The very fact that they could say this, so we could never give them a chiyuv misa. But even if they don't say this, we can't give them a chiyuv misa. Rav Chisda, so Rav Chisda said, going back now to the halachas of the interrogations of the Edom. Part of the sugya we had already earlier in the Masechta. So Rav Chisda said, one person comes and says that this murderer killed with a sword, and the other says he killed him with another kind of weapon, a hariran, not sure exactly what that is, but it's another kind of weapon. So then ein zeh nochen. So it's not an accurate edus. You can't compare. There's a discrepancy here. If one person says he was wearing dark clothing, the other says he was wearing white, light clothing. That difference between these two Eidim when you interrogate them is not enough of a discrepancy that we should say that they're lying. Because it's a detail that they didn't necessarily pay attention to. But the Gemara asks on this, Meisvei, it says in the Braise, Nochen. We learn out from the Pasuk where it says, you have to see if Emes Nochen Adovar, Shiyei Nochen. The words of the two Eidim have to be accurate. And therefore, Echadayim B'Sayef Hargay, and the Echadayim B'Haririn Hargay, one says it was a sword, the other one says it was Haririn. Or, and the Braise goes on to say, or Echadayim B'Kelev Shchayrim, Echadayim B'Kelev Levanim. One says he wore dark clothing, the other one says he wore light clothing, Ein Zeh Nochen. So it's not accurate. So we clearly see, not like Rav Chisda said. Says the Gemara, Tirgum Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda explained this Braise that the clothing it's speaking about is not the clothing that they were wearing, but rather besudder. It's talking about a handkerchief, shachankai bay. That was the item that was used to murder this person. It's a handkerchief that he choked this person with. The Hain is Sayef Ha'arinon. Just like the Sayef Ha'arinon, that's something that when you're testifying you pay attention to because that's the actual weapon that was used. We're talking here about a garment that was used or a handkerchief that was used as a weapon. That's why it is going to be a discrepancy in the Eidos. Toshema, another Braise, it says, Echadoim sandal of Shchayrin. One Eid said that his shoes or sandals were black. Vechadoim sandal of Levanim. The other one says it was white. Ein Zeh Nochen. So this Eidus is not accurate. They're not saying the same thing. So we clearly see that even if they're just a discrepancy about the shoes of the murderer, that's enough of a reason not to trust them. So Hasam Nami, there as well, Rav Chisda will say the same thing, that the shoe was the item used for to murder this person. He banged him with the shoe over his head, and that's what killed this person. And they're arguing about the shoe if it was white or black. So since that's the weapon itself, it's a discrepancy. Tashema, the Gemara brings an ayah, and this is what was mentioned in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says that Maise Obadek ben Zakkai be'uktzei teina. There was once a case of Eidos about a murderer, and Ben Zakkai, he interrogated the Eidim about the tree that was there. It was a fig tree, and there were the stems. What kind of stems of the figs were they? So he's mamish interrogating them about a detail which is a very side detail, and nevertheless, if there's a discrepancy in this, then he wouldn't accept these Eidim. So Rami Bachame says, Kagoin, the case over here actually is not about a murderer that was under a fig tree or near a fig tree, but the case over here is Chil Shabbos. Kagoin she'okatz te'ene b'Shabbos. The halakha mikdal. The case over here is that this person was machal Shabbos because he cut off the fig from the tree. That actually is the Chil Shabbos. So since that's the very act of the Aveda, so therefore, if there's a discrepancy regarding the stems of what was cut off, then it's going to be a problem in the Eidos. But the Gemara asks on this, but V'atanya, in a Braise we learned, Omru Loi, they said to Ben Zakkai, Tachas Te'ena Hargoi, Omru Loi, the Bezdin, when they interrogated, based on what Ben Zakkai said, so they interrogated and they asked, Tachas Te'ena Hargoi, did he kill him under this fig tree? And meaning it was a case of a murderer. And it happened under a fig tree. And it's regarding this that Ben Zakkai said that, was it thick stems, was it thin stems? So Rami Bachame says, okay, it is a case of murder, but the case over here is that he poked this person with a branch of this fig tree, and that's how that itself was the weapon of how he killed this person, and therefore the interrogation regarding the stems of this fig from the fig tree is mamish regarding the weapon itself, and therefore this is something that if there's a discrepancy, it won't be a good edus. But the Gemara goes on further and asks, Tashema, another Braise we learned, Omar Lehen, that Ben Zakkai said to them that they interrogated the Eidim, Te'enezu, this fig, Uktzeha Dakin, the stems of the fig, was it thin? Uktzeha Gasin, was the stems thick? Te'enim Shchayrim, was it dark figs? Te'enim Levanos, was it lighter figs? So here, they actually also interrogated about the color of the fruits themselves. So even if you're going to say that he poked them with the branch, but the actual figs itself was not part of the weapon of what did the Aveda here. And nevertheless, we see that he interrogated also about the color of the fruit itself. So therefore, the Gemara concludes that taka from Ben Zakkai, we see, it doesn't hold like what Achista said. Elam Rav Yosef, mi Ben Zakkai, loise vinish. You're going to come and ask from what Ben Zakkai said. Shani Ben Zakkai, the bedikis kechakirais mashvile. Ben Zakkai held that those bedikis, all these examinations of all these kinds of questions, it's the same like the interrogations which are the Sheva Hakiris that the Mishnah said regarding the timing and the location. If there's a discrepancy in the Eidim there, it's certainly Pasal Eidos. Ben Zakkai held that all these kinds of side questions are the same like the Hakiris, that if there's any discrepancy, it's going to be Pasal. Okay, so therefore, but Rav Chisda though did not hold like Ben Zakkai. Okay, now the Gemara addresses Man Ben Zakkai. The Mishnah says that this was Ben Zakkai. Which Ben Zakkai is this? Ilem Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai. Are you going to say that this is Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai? But the question is, Mi Ava Sanhedrin. Was Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai in the Sanhedrin when it was still a time when the Bezdin was giving a Chi of Misa? When was Bezdin able to give a Chi of Misa? Only when they were able to sit in the Sanhedrin in the Beis HaMikdash. But otherwise, there's no Chi of Misa. Now, about Tanya, but we learned about the timing of when Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai lived. Kol Shnaisav Shal Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai. How long was Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai's life? Meya V'esrim Shana, 120 years. Arbaim Shana Asak B'Prakmatya. 40 years he was in business. Mem Shana, then after that for 40 years Lamad, he learned. And Arbaim Shana, the last 40 years of his life, Limid. Then he taught others. Okay, so that's what we see there. So we see here an amazing thing, by the way, about Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai, that even though for 40 years he was in business, but then later he became the great Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai. He went to learn after 40 years, and then in the last 40 years of his life, he taught Torah. Now, Vitanya, we learned about the Sanhedrin of the Beis HaMikdash. When did the Sanhedrin get exiled from the Beis HaMikdash? Arbaim Shana, Koidim Chorban Abayis, 40 years before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, Galsa Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin was exiled, V'yashvala B'Chanus, and instead of being in the Beis HaMikdash, they were in another location, Chanus, which is the area in Yerushalayim. So at that point, they couldn't already judge Dini Nefashis. Now, at what time? Now, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avodimi, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avodimi said about this Laima. This is coming to say, Shaloidanu dinik nasis. They did not judge any subjects of penalties from that point on. Now, the Gemara says that this is actually not true. Dinik nasis. From that point on, because they weren't in the Beis HaMikdash, you couldn't judge any subjects of penalties, even if they're not in the Beis HaMikdash. The knossos you could still paskin. Ela shaloidanu dinik nefashis. From that point forward, they couldn't paskin capital punishment. Now, in what time period did Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai live? And we learned about Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai that Mishachar Beis HaMikdash, when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, his skin Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai, he was misaken different takanas after the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash. So what does this mean? That the last period of Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai's life, that he was actually already teaching and he was misaken. When was that? It was after the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash. So it must be that since already 40 years from before the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash, the Sanhedrin was out of its place in the Beis HaMikdash, so it wasn't shaykh to say that Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai at that time period was already on the Sanhedrin and he was coming to say that you have to interrogate the Eidim even about such a side matter. So it can't be Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai. Says the Gemara, Ela Ben Zakkai Dalma. So when it says here Ben Zakkai, it's not Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai, it's a different individual that also had the name of Ben Zakkai, but it's someone else. It says the Gemara, Hochanami Mistavra, it's logical to say that it's not Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai, the Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai, because if this is Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai, Karilei Rebbe Ben Zakkai, Rebbe here in the Mishnah would say that his name is only Ben Zakkai. Why would he refer to him as Ben Zakkai? So it's not kovedik to refer to him just as a name as Ben Zakkai. His name is Rabban Yochanan Ben Zakkai. Why are we referring to him as Ben Zakkai? Elamai, it must be that it's not Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, it's someone else. But the Gemara refutes this because Vatanya, we learned in Abraise, Maise Ubadak Rabban Yochanan Ben Zakkai Be'oktzek Tainim. The Braise brings the same story of the Mishnah, and there it names him as Rabban Yochanan Ben Zakkai, that he interrogated the Eidim about the stems of the figs. So we see that it was Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. So how do we understand this regarding the timing? The Churban of the Beis HaMikdash, if already from 40 years before they were not in this Beis HaMikdash, how could this be Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai? Ela, so the Gemara explains. Talmud Ayeshev Lifnei Rabbi Hava. 40 years before, so Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai was taken not yet in that last stage of his life that he was teaching Torah. This was within the middle stage of his life where he was still a student and he was still learning. And he was then a Talmud Yeshiv Lifnei Rabbi. He was a student that was sitting in front of the Sanhedrin in the Beis HaMikdash. And V'amar Milse, he said something about this case. U'mistaver luhu taime. And the Sanhedrin accepted this svara that he said, how to interrogate the Eidim, that we could save this person of a Chiv Misa. And what happened is that they then brought him in to join the Sanhedrin, as the halacha is. When a Talmud says a svara, part of that the Sanhedrin accepts, he becomes part of the Sanhedrin on that day. The kavu b'shmei, and then it was established on his name of what Rabbi Yechanan Ben Zakkai said. Now, ki have a lama, so since at that time period he was only learning, he was only a student. Ben Zakkai have a karele. He was called just Ben Zakkai. He wasn't called yet the Rabban Yochanan Ben Zakkai. Ketalmud Yeshiv Lifnei Rabba. He was just a student that's sitting in front of a teacher. And this was still before the Churban, even 40 years before the Churban when he was a student there. Now, ki have a limed. Then, in the last 40 years of his life, when he started teaching Torah and he became the great Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, have a karele Rabban Yochanan Ben Zakkai. So then they called him Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. So Kikarale Ben Zakkai here in the Mishnah, when it's recorded as the name of Ben Zakkai, Al Shem de Meikara, it's because of the way he was originally, because that was at the time when he said this svara, he was at the time of only being called Ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, and the fact that we find in the other Mishnah is that he's referred to as Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai, Al Shem de Hashta. That's because of later when he began teaching Torah and he became the great Rabbi Yochanan Ben Zakkai. Okay, going back to what it said in the Mishnah. Maise obodak chulu ma bechiris chulu. So the Mishnah goes on to say that what's the difference between chakiris and bedikis? What is the difference between the 7 basic questions that you have to ask regarding the timing and the location, and then the other examinations that you ask the Eidim? So the Mishnah says when it comes to the chakiris, if any of the Eidim say about any of the details I don't know, so then the whole Eidus is batal. But when it comes to the bedikis, when it comes to the other questions that we ask, so then, if one of the Eidim, the Mishnah says, if echad oime eini yedeya, and then the Mishnah goes on to say, this is the point the Gemara is going to stop on. Vafil shnayim oimer mein ana yodim, even if 2 of them say that we don't know, edus and kayemis, is the edus could still be in effect. Okay, so the Gemara is going to ask on this, mai afilu shnayim oimrim. What's the chiddush over here that the Mishnah is saying that even if 2 of the Eidim say we don't know about these examinations, the edus is still effect? Pshita. It's obvious. If you're saying that if one of the Eidim don't know this detail, so the Eidus is still good. So the same should apply if 2 say they don't know. If this is something that you have to know, like a time or location, so then if you don't know, then even 1 Eid is not good. So if you don't have to know, so it doesn't make a difference if it's 1 or 2. Why is the Mishnah spelling out that even if the 2 say they don't know, it's still going to be a good Eidus? So Rav Sheshes says that you have to change the whole gears in the Mishnah, and it's really going back to the beginning, to the case of the interrogations, the chakiris. Ki amar echad eni yedeya. Sorry, areishikai. That's right. Areishikai. This goes back to the ratio of the Mishnah. Va'achi ka'amar, and this is how you have to read the Mishnah. V'chakiris, when it comes to the basic interrogations of the Eidim regarding the timing and the location, afil shnayim oimrim yadainu. Even if you have Eidim, it's more than 2 Eidim. And 2 of the Eidim say that we know the time, we know the location. Let's say there's a 3rd Eid, and now this 3rd Eid says Eini Yedeya. I don't know the time or the location. So you may think, well, you have 2 that do know. That's Eidus. So why, if there's only a 3rd that doesn't know, it should still be okay. Nevertheless, I do some betela. This Eidus is going to be batal. Why is it batal? Says the Gemara, Keman, according to whose opinion is our Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva, it follows Rabbi Akiva's opinion, the Makish Shleisha L'Shnayim. Rabbi Akiva compares 3 to 2, and according to Rashi, the detail that we're talking about over here is regarding Eidim Zaymimin. Rabbi Akiva says you can't turn a group of Eidim into Eidim Zaymimin until you mazim the entire group. If you could only be mazim part of them, then they can't be Eidim Zaymimin. So if they can't be Eidim Zaymimin, so then the entire Eidus falls apart. So even if only one of the Eidim say, I don't know about the timing or the location, so you can't make that one person of the group Eidim Zaymimin, so now the entire group cannot be made Eidim Zaymimin. So therefore, the whole Eidus is going to be batal.
They're not together anyways.
Huh?
Each one's being interrogated separately.
Yeah, they're being interrogated separately, correct. But the point is, when 1 Eid out of 3, or even let's say out of 10, 1 out of 10 says, I don't know, and he cannot be made into Eidim Zaymimin, so because of this, the entire group of Eidus falls apart, because in order to make Eidim Zaymimin, you have to be able to make all of them Eidim Zaymimin. And in this case, one of them cannot be made into Eidim Zaymimin, so the whole thing falls apart.
If that's the case, you just bring in 1 Eid after the other ones, and you mess up the whole Eidim Zaymimin.
What do you mean?
B'kavanat tchila, you just bring in another Eid that doesn't know how to answer the Hakira. And then the whole thing falls.
Okay, true. Now the Gemara, this is the pshat of Rav Sheshes, but the Gemara asks in this, Amar Rave, so Rave said, but v'ha'edusan kayemes katani. How are you changing the whole gears of the Mishnah here? In the Mishnah, it said that if they don't know, then edusan kayemes. What the Gemara is saying here, that when one doesn't know, then the whole Eidus becomes batal. So how are you changing the girsa in the Mishnah? Ela Amar Rava, so Rava says, Hachi Kamar. This is what the Mishnah means to say. And according to Rava, you also have to change the girsa to some extent, because it goes back also on the ratio of the Mishnah. We're not talking about the seif of the Mishnah, and he's changing the girsa, but not as much as Rav Sheshes. Afilu b'chakiris, even when it comes to what we're interrogating Eidim. Now, in the case of by the chakiris, the Eidim have to say they know everything. They can't say they don't know. Now, even by the interrogations, where they must know, if it's a case of Shnayim Oimrim Yadainu, two of the Eidim say we know, Ve'echad Oime'eni Yideya, and only one says I don't know. So this is different than the girsa that we have in our Mishnah. In our Mishnah it says Shnayim say we don't know. So here he's changing the girsa. Two say they do know, and one says he does not know. Eidusan kayemes. This is like the girsa we had in our Mishnah. The Eidus will still be kayam, and according to this pshat, come on, according to who is this? They're like Rabbi Akiva, not like Rabbi Akiva. If two say they know, so we have to. The third says he doesn't know, and you can't be mazim the third. It's not, the other two are not dependent on the third. These two are separately going to be Eidim. So it's not like Rabbi Akiva that says that it goes together. Rav Kahane, Rav Safre, there's another detail here now the Gemara will discuss, the difference between the Sheva Hakiris, the 7 basic questions we ask about timing and location, and then the other examinations. So Rav Kahane and Rav Safre, Tonu Sanhedrin by Rabbe. Rav Kahane and Rav Safre were learning Masechta Sanhedrin by Rabbe. Pagabu Rami Bachame met them. Amalahu, he says to them, Mayam Risababa Sanhedrin de Rabbe. What did you say? What did you hear about the way Rabbe, the great Rabbe, that he taught Masechta Sanhedrin, and what did he explain? So Amri Lei, Rav Kahane and Rav Safre said to Rami Bachame, Umay Amririn Baba Sanhedrin Gredese. And what is there in the Masechta of a Sanhedrin without learning by Rabbe? Meaning, Umay Kashilach. What is it that you want to know? What question do you have about Masechta Sanhedrin that you want to know what we learned by Rabbe? Amalei, so Rami Bachama says to them, I want to know the pshat in our Mishnah that we're learning. Maha diktani. Here, this halacha that we learned in the Mishnah where it says that Ma ben chakiris lebedikis, what's the difference between those interrogations of the Eidim? That is 7 basic questions about the timing and location. And then the bedikis, the other examinations. That chakiris, the Mishnah says, when it comes to the interrogations, if any of the Eidim says, I don't know, I do some betela. The whole Eidus is nullified. Bedikis, however, by other questions, if any of the Eidim says, I don't know, or even if 2 of the Eidim say they don't know, the Eidus is still in effect. So the question that Rami Bachama asked is, Mechti, let's see, Idi the Iraisihi. Both the fact that you have to do the Chakiris and the fact that it has to be Bedikis as well, it's all Minat Teire. I just learned that. It says in the Teire, V'darashta, V'chakarta, has to be Nochain, and so on. All these things is part of the Gemara quoted before the Braisa. Nochain means that it has to be totally accurate, including the color of the weapon that was used. So if this is all Minat Teire, so Ma'ishna Chakiris and Ma'ishna Bedikis. Why by Chakiris, if one says I don't know, the Eidus falls apart, and why by Bedikis, by the additional examinations, we don't say this? This is the question Rami Bachama had. So Amrulei, so they explained to him, they said to him, Hachi Hashta, how could you compare? The Chakiris, when it comes to those interrogations about the timing and location, if one of the Eidim say, I don't know, a dusam betela, the Eidus is going to be nullified. The reason is because now the Havila Eidus, Shiyat Yachal Azima. Because if they don't know the timing and location, so then this is an Eidus where they could never be falsified. Because no one can come and say, Yamanu Yisim B'Makam Plani, because they themselves are saying, we don't know the timing or the location. Therefore, the whole Eidus falls apart. That's one of the, as we just learned, the kashrus of Eidim. You have to be able to turn them into Eidim Zaymim. Bedikis, however, the other examinations, the other questions about the color of the weapon and other things like that, even if one says I don't know, the Eidus will still be in effect because it's an Eidus Shatayachal Azima. It's still an Eidus that you can be mazimit. That's ma'akiv. That's the limud that we learn out in order for the Eidim to be kosher. But the other examinations, true, we learn out from the pasuk Nachan that you have to ask those questions. But if they say they don't know, it's not going to be mevatel the Eidus. That's what they explained to Rami Bachama. So Amalahu, Rami Bachama said to Rav Kahane and Rav Safre, Ihachi, if so, Amrisu Batuve, you're saying a lot here. Ihachi Amrisu, again, Ihachi Amrisu, if this is what you said regarding the Pshat in this Mishnah, Tuva Amrisu, but you said a lot. In other words, he liked their Pshat, and he said, you said very well, explain the difference between the Chakiris and the Bedikis. So Amri Lei, Rav Kahane and Rav Safra said to Rami Bachame, Mitivusei demar, because of the fact that you're complimenting us and you're telling us how good we're saying, Amrin and Batuva. So we could say, we could say good pshat here in Masechta Sanhedrin. Minizihusei demar. But if you would scream at us and you would sort of intimidate us, in asking us the pshat in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, we wouldn't be able to say anything about in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. So here you see, regarding a teacher, that if the more you compliment the student, the more you bring out his good, the more he'll say good. But if you overwhelm him or you intimidate him, so then he's going to be scared and he's not going to be able to say anything. Okay, going back to the Mishnah, it said, Echad Oimer Chulu. So the Mishnah said, regarding the timing, if there's a discrepancy between the Eidim regarding the date of the month, so the Mishnah said if one says it was Beis and the other said it's Gimel, so then there's still a good Eidos. Why? Because you could say that one knew that there was a Lamed of the previous month, and therefore he says it's only Beis, and the other one did not know there was a Lamed, he didn't know that the Ibur of the Chaydish, and therefore he thinks that today is already Gimel. But if one said it's Gimel, the other says it's Hey, it's 2 days off, so then in such a case, it's clear that they're not a kosher Eidos. Okay, so the Mishnah gave the example of the beginning of the month, where Eidim can make a mistake and they don't realize that there was a Lamed in the previous month. So the question is, At Kama, until what date in the month do I say that the Eidim one of the Eidim may have not realized that there was a Lamed in the previous month? That's until most of the month, until Tezvav. After Tezvav, once you come to the second half of the month, the Eidim definitely know that the previous month had a Lamed, and if they're off even one day, then they're not going to be a kosher Eidos. So Rava said, I can prove this from you, from what the Mishnah itself said. So because the Mishnah says, one eight says it happened on Gimel of the month. The other one says it happened on the Hay of the month. They do some betail because they're off 2 days. The Eidus is going to be bottle. Now, but the question though is, why are you saying the Eidus is bottle? V'amai name, I can still say that it's also because they weren't aware about the Ibur of the Chaydish. And this is not only the past month, but maybe from 2 months ago. This aid that's saying that today is Gimel is because he knows that not only the previous month had a Lamed, but the month before also had a Lamed, so therefore it's Gimel. Maybe this aid, even such a long time later, he still doesn't know that 2 months before there was a Lamed, and in the past month there was a Lamed, and therefore he could be off even 2 days. Elolav, says the Gemara, it must be Mishum de Beruba Yoda, like Rabbi Yechanan said, because once you come after most of the month, the Eidim know already that there was a Lamed in the month before, and therefore it can't be that this can't be the reason why they're being off 2 days, and therefore it's going to be a Pasal Eidus. But the Gemara rejects this Rai from the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, no, it could be that within 1 month, even after you come to Tezvav, even in the second half of the month, not necessarily do the Eidim know that the previous month had a Lamed, that it was a Mu'obar. Now, but if you hear though, it's another point. It's about 2 different months. The point of here is when Bezdin would be Mekadesh the Chaydish, they would blow the shofar for people to know that they're being Mekadesh the Chaydish today. So regarding 1 month, it's possible that he made a mistake and he didn't know the Ibn of 1 month. But today she put it twice, the Bezdin already blew the shofar twice in 2 different months. We're not going to say that the Eidim make a mistake. That's the reason why over here, if there's a discrepancy from Gimel to Hay, we're not going to consider this to be a mistake. It's going to be plus labels. Yeah.